For those of you who thought it would be a cold day when I go off the air, well, your day has come. I'm Charlie Sykes. The final Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. Well, this is it, our final show of 2016. It's actually the final edition of Sunday Insight ever. In the year that was, are you kidding me? Nobody saw this coming. The rise of Donald Trump, the fall of the House of Clinton, a stunning Republican sweep nationally and in Wisconsin. Senator Ron Johnson defeats a comeback attempt by Russ Feingold. Republicans end up expanding their margins in both the Assembly and the Senate. 2016 saw Britain shock the world with their Brexit vote. State Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley wins a full term after a tough and contentious campaign. The humanitarian catastrophe in Syria just gets worse. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia passes away, putting the balance of the nation's high court into play. And that high court drives a final stake into the heart of the long-running John Doe probe by refusing to take up the prosecutor's appeal. It was a year that saw Russian hacking and FBI probes of private email servers. And joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Hope, former Assembly Speaker Scott Jensen, defense attorney Dan Adams, and research fellow at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Colin Roth. So let's cut to the chase here. The biggest story of the year obviously was Donald Trump. He lost Wisconsin in the primary big time, but in November he won the state. So how did he do it, Scott Jensen?
He made a very strong emotional connection with working class folks all over the state who have felt that neither party, Democrat or Republican, has been listening to them as the world economy has been really ripping apart their lives. And they felt that he expressed their frustration, their angers, that his thoughts were their thoughts, and there was nothing the media or others could do to dissuade people once they had that emotional connection.
This was not Trump country. He had very, very high negatives. Right. He did not do well here in Wisconsin at all. That's why nobody saw Wisconsin.
But he started out coming to Wisconsin and trashing the governor, trashing Paul Ryan, and I think it took him a while to overcome that. But he kept coming back, and I think that helped him make that emotional connection.
Okay, so why did this happen?
Well, there's countless reasons. In fact, at home I have a little advent calendar. Instead of chocolates every day. I have a bitter little pill that I take. Let's go over a couple. The biggest thing was Donald Trump co-opted some of the economic populism that had traditionally been owned by the Democratic Party. He came in and said to people who have essentially been left behind in this kind of two Americas inequality trend of things, I'm here with you. Nobody else is listening. Neither party has ever listened to you over the last 20 years, but I'm here. And he was talking about trade, he was talking about cultural issues, and he won those voters overwhelmingly. The other big thing he did was consolidate the Republicans at the end with some help from James Comey.
Okay, now, given some of the gaffes and the scandals and the controversies about him, all of which Wisconsin voters were paying attention to, but that did not dent him. And Dan's absolutely right. Republicans did come home. They coalesced. So why did he win?
Yeah, I think there are many people in this country, again, rightly or wrongly, who believe this election was truly about the future of this country and whether it was going to go one direction or another. And I think there are some who are so elated with Donald Trump's victory, they think this country was saved. They think we have rejected Obama.
But why Wisconsin? This is a state that has not, I'm going to keep coming back, we didn't go Republican since 1988.
Right, he was able to make up the numbers that he didn't get in southeastern Wisconsin that a Republican traditionally gets by overwhelmingly appealing to people in Green Bay, northern and western Wisconsin.
Maybe the question shouldn't be how did he win, but how did Hillary lose?
Right.
Mm-hmm. She was not able to energize the Obama coalition. Yeah. She was not able to bring in a lot of those Bernie Sanders supporters. And Donald Trump appealed to the angry, white, blue-collar American. And they didn't.
There were more of them than we knew.
Yeah, and many of them didn't vote necessarily for Donald Trump. They'd be foolish to. They voted against the status quo. They were just fed up with the status quo.
Well, you're making an interesting point. I mean, Donald Trump won, there's no question about it, but also Hillary Clinton lost, and you look at the numbers, Donald Trump actually got fewer votes than Mitt Romney got 4 years ago, and Hillary Clinton, you could argue, lost this election in Milwaukee County, about 39,000 fewer votes for Barack Obama. So that was a huge undervote. African Americans just did not turn out for her.
Did not buy into her rhetoric.
You know, I also think
show up for them.
Yeah,
she didn't show up for them.
Yeah,
Why would they show up for her?
Right.
I mean, that's part of politics. Is popularity, personality, presence equals popularity. She was never here.
Okay, Scott, I know
you can't win that.
You've been much closer to this, and you've done polling and everything, and I know that the economic issue played exactly the way you said, but I also think that there are some other non-economic issues.
A whole bunch of cultural issues.
I really don't think that the Democrats fully understand, and you tell me whether I'm wrong about this, you know, in terms of the gun issue. The gun control issue hurt Democrats far more than they realized, particularly, you know, throughout the rural Midwest. I also think that the war on cops, things like that, the war on terror, that sense of elitism, the fact that they didn't have a sense that Democrats were going to grow the economy in any way. Now, some of the cultural issues, like, for example, the transgender bathroom, not so much whether people care, but it was just an indication of, like, you're so disconnected.
Focused. You are not focused on what I care about if you're arguing about transgender bathrooms.
Yeah, I mean,
you're not focused on jobs.
Right. If you're worried about keeping your job in Western Wisconsin, you don't really care about the transgender bathroom.
Oh, I completely agree with that. And so many cultural issues, and I think one of the great rebukes of this election is kind of the cultural snobbery, this sense of smugness that either comes from the coast in Hollywood or in New York and Washington from elites in government and media.
I don't think that can be overstated, but I also think that I don't think you can overstate how much, you know, anti-Hillary sentiment there was out there, or the incredible power of sort of political tribalism these days, that in fact, you know, Republicans came home to Donald Trump. What is your glass half full? What is your glass half empty? Let's go around the table. We'll start with you, Michael Holt.
Well, my glass is half full because this show has provided me a forum to provide insight on issues from a black perspective for over 22 years. I was 6'5" with black hair back then. My glass is half empty because this show's conclusion leaves a tremendous void. But I'll continue throwing rocks at the castle wall through the community journal and social media.
Scott Jensen.
My glass is half full because I'm excited about Trump and Ryan unleashing the American economy by eliminating regulations and cutting taxes. My glass is half empty because I'm frustrated that Obama will be issuing new regulations and executive orders right up to the last day.
Dan Adams.
Well, occasionally people who watch this show will ask me, how can you sit and listen to those people, meaning these conservatives? My answer is usually, you mean my friends, Charlie, Colin, Michelle, and Brian? We disagree a lot, but they're good people. So while my glass is half empty because this is the last Insight show ever, it's half full because I think we've demonstrated you can debate, even bicker, with people that don't agree with you, but in the end we can disagree without being disagreeable.
Colin Roth.
Yeah, my glass is half empty because Charlie has just one final radio show on Monday. It's half full because even after he signs off, his influence, insight, and mentorship will have changed Wisconsin for the better.
Sounds like I'm dead. My glass is half full because conservatives and Republicans have an amazing opportunity to enact their agenda next year. It's half empty because they are also only a tweet away from having it all blow up on them. Our Sunday Insight Countdown shows the Electoral College meets in 19 days. Donald J. Trump takes the oath of office in 33 days, and the midterm election is just 688 days from today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our final Sunday Insight. This year we saw the Bucks begin work on a new downtown arena, the city move ahead with a downtown trolley, and Republicans squabble among themselves over transportation funding. Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abele and Mayor Tom Barrett both won new 4-year terms. All in all, a very big year for Wisconsin. Kenosha native Reince Priebus is named White House Chief of Staff. Paul Ryan remains Speaker of the House. Ron Johnson returns as one of the Senate's most powerful chairmen. And Scott Walker presides over a solidly Republican state government. So let's have the panel pick the best and worst plays of the year. Let's start with this. What was the best call of the year, best play of the year?
The one that sticks out to me is in the wake of Justice Scalia's death, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans deciding they would not confirm Merrick Garland. That was a roll of the dice that went against popular opinion at the time. They were betting on winning the presidential election, which seemed like a long shot, and it pays off because I think Donald Trump's going to pick a very conservative Supreme Court justice.
That's a pretty good. Best call, best play of the year, Michael.
Well, I'll make it local. And I think one of the best is the black community woke up and stopped this Chris Larson white workers' family party's train from kidnapping and taking over the black agenda. The worst call, and I'll go national, was the NAACP, the National Association for Colored People, passing a resolution to block the expansion of charter schools. I mean, they're totally out of touch now and discredited.
Yeah, okay, let's stick with the best. Best call, best play of the year.
I think at state politics, Scott Fitzgerald made the best calls of the year. He was the first one on board the Trump train. He bet on expanding his Senate majority when everybody was worried about him losing seats. No one else joined him to play. In a couple of seats, he won one, and by but 60 more votes, he'd have picked off the Democratic leader of the state Senate. So a great year for Scott Fitzgerald.
Well, I think without a doubt it's Paul Ryan and the way that he kind of had his cake and ate it too during the Trump campaign. You know, there was a lot of calls during some of the low points in that campaign for him to distance himself, actually unendorse Trump. He didn't. He played politics. He bought low, and now he's going to sell high. He has a lot of power to get his agenda through.
Well, you know, if this election had turned out differently, the guy who would be the scapegoat, who would be talking about as the biggest loser of the year, is Reince Priebus. But let's be honest about it. Reince Priebus also made some pretty good calls, and right now is playing a very, very significant role. So I would certainly give him credit. But I would also say that Ron Johnson made one of the best calls when the National Republican Senate Committee cut him off, and everybody wrote him off. Ron Johnson said, "Okay, you know what? I'm going to run this campaign my way. I'm going to start writing my own ads." And you could just sense the momentum of that race. And in terms of huge upsets, you know, I know it's overshadowed by the presidential race, but Ron Johnson coming back and beating Russ Feingold, extraordinary story. So the worst call of the year.
One that's a really difficult call, but I think given current events, it's just very pressing, is just the U.S. and the world's inability to stop the slaughter in Syria. And with the fall of Aleppo and just the inability to stop that is going to be a stain.
James Comey, the FBI director, coming out last minute with a non-story letter which completely stopped Hillary Clinton's momentum, if you can call it that, at the end, and ensuring that Donald Trump would be our president.
Okay, worst call.
The decision by the Clinton campaign to spend millions of dollars in states she didn't have a chance of winning to try to get a huge electoral landslide, and instead she loses the whole election by not playing the game right in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
My worst call of the year is number one, Hillary Clinton's decision to let's pretend like we're not in trouble in Michigan. Let's never, ever come back to Wisconsin. But also, I mean, the Democrats have to look themselves in the mirror and go, okay, why did you think that nominating somebody like Hillary Clinton, you know, in a year like this was a good idea? You may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you are first.
Well, Donald Trump issued a thank you note to black folks who didn't vote, saying your apathy got him elected. Think about that next election.
Scott Jensen.
The Democratic Party made a huge mistake when it abandoned its historic position as a defender of the little guy to instead hang out with Wall Street elites, Hollywood celebrities, and people who want free stuff rather than a job.
Dan Adams.
My advice is for Wisconsin Democrats. There must be competition to decide who gets to lead the party out of the wilderness. Let's have a big primary for the governor's race with lots of candidates. May the best vision win.
Colin Roth.
My advice is to check out the staggering results of a new study from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty that projects more than $500 million in economic benefits from school choice in Milwaukee.
Well, my advice is to my fellow conservatives, put not your faith in princes. Do not sacrifice your principles on the altar of other people's ambitions. In politics, there are two kinds of people who run for office, those who want to be something and those who want to do something. And here in Wisconsin, we've been blessed with people who want to make a difference and actually fix problems. And that makes us unusual, and it makes what we've done here distinctive. But ultimately, our politics cannot simply be about politicians. There's a fundamental difference between movements based on ideas and based on cults of personality. Princes, politicians, and faux messiahs will inevitably let you down. This is not a glitch, it's a feature. Next on Sunday Insight, what, if anything, did we learn this year? Welcome back to our final Sunday Insight. In the year that was, the U.S. swim team dominated at the Olympics. Brangelina breaks up. I know that was tough on Dan Adams. We all learned about something called fake news. And after stunning the world and maybe himself, Donald Trump is elected the 45th president of the United States and begins assembling his cabinet. So let's look back on 2016 and see whether we learned anything at all. Let's go around the table. What did you learn in 2016, Dan Adams?
Well, I learned that change is the only constant. And, you know, when I was in college, we read this book called The End of History by Francis Fukuyama. And we really thought that there was just a sorting out of the liberal democracies in the world and kind of the elitist view of how things were going to go with free trade and open markets and everything would take care of us all. We've learned now that that's not true, and history goes on.
What'd you learn, Scott Jensen?
I think we learned that everything we thought we knew about presidential politics was wrong. It's not good to be a sitting governor running for president. Right. The guy with the most money or a woman with the most money doesn't necessarily win. That Twitter and free media beats paid advertising. That emotional connections beat issue papers. With a lot of things we learned this time that people, I think, it was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, it was a pretty long list. Yeah. What did you learn, Michael Holt?
That's a lot. I learned that every vote does count.
You didn't know that?
Well, I had troubles going into the voting booth this year, actually, for the presidential election. I learned that the Democrats, or maybe the Democrats should learn that taking our votes for granted does not pay off in the long run. And lastly, I learned that American people are some of the most gullible people on this planet. I mean, I can plant some fake news and they'll believe it. You know, how much gullibility is controlling our future?
Well, you know what? See, I agree with you on that, by the way. The problem is not the fact that there's fake news. The problem is that so many people are willing to believe the fake news. That is the problem. What did you learn this year, Colin Roth?
I think we all learned a lot of humility. I think we were all in bubbles. We all got engaged in feedback loops and bought into a lot of conventional wisdom. And I think kind of the old adage, 2 ears, 1 mouth, we need to listen more and hear one another more. I think voters are a lot less ideological than we thought they were, and I think that this election speaks to that. And ultimately, I think one of the more lasting consequences is that free markets and free speech are in for a season, I think, of peril, and they're going to be under duress, and it's something that we all need to stand up for.
Well, yeah, I agree with you on all of those points. I mean, the one thing that I learned is that that conservatives were not who we thought they were, and there are not as many actual conservatives as we believed or as conservatives thought they were. In terms of fiscal policy, the things that we had assumed were consensuses, as it turned out, a lot of that, the conservative, intellectual ideas about the, small government and constitutionalism was kind of a thin crust over the movement. And so when somebody like Donald Trump, blew into town and he was upended it, I think we realized, how narrow that was. The other thing we learned, and going back to this whole question of bubbles and silos, that we had actually created this environment for fake news, that we had so succeeded, and we're part of this as well, delegitimizing other media sources, that it got to the point where we didn't have any guideposts anymore. All the referees were down, and that really created a post-truth, post-fact political environment. And I have to admit, I should have seen that coming, but like a lot of people, there were a lot of things we didn't see coming. So what is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, what I don't get is that, Kanye West, who came to national fame for declaring that President Bush didn't care about black people, is now happily in bed with Donald Trump. I wonder what's going on under those covers. And let me get it one more time. He needs to be pimp slapped.
Kanye West 2024, as you heard it here. Scott Jensen.
Charlie, what I don't get is why you would give up getting up at 4 o'clock on cold mornings like this to do battle on the radio with folks like Earl.
Yeah, it is a mystery. Dan Adams.
I don't get how the GOP, the party of Reagan, which formerly rejected détente and accommodation of the Soviet Union, is now the party of the Vladimir Putin apologists. This is a historic and incredible mistake.
Colin Roth.
Yeah, I'll build off that. What I seriously don't get is why, when so many Republicans have suddenly decided that Vladimir Putin, a former KGB spy, is someone to be admired and trusted.
Yeah, these are scary times. So what I don't get is, how did we get this campaign so wrong? All of it, and pretty much all of us. There might be a lesson there. Coming up next, I'm going to share some final thoughts as we turn out the lights on our final Sunday Insight after 22 years. But first, here is your Morning News Update. Well, 2016 is almost over, and this is the final edition of Sunday Insight. Now, we've been doing this show, Sunday Insight, for about 22 years. When I started, Bill Clinton was in his first term. And over the years, we've talked about school choice, hanging chads, 9/11, wars in the Middle East, the election of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. In more than 2 decades, we've talked about this community's challenges and its tragedies. The county pension scandal, Miller Park, Act 10, downtown trolleys, police shootings, pension scandals, and the rise of Scott Walker, who was actually a regular panelist on this show at one time. So is Reince Priebus, who is about to become White House Chief of Staff. Our guests included Archbishop Timothy Dolan and Speaker Paul Ryan. And I'd like to say that we always got it right, but of course we didn't. But we tried. And most of the time we kept our conversations civil. We tried to shed a little light, and occasionally we had some fun. But I'd like to say this. I am grateful for a chance to talk with you every Sunday morning for 2 decades. And thanks to my great producers, Gary Reistad and Jim Stoll, and all the panelists who shared their insight, including especially Michael Holt, who's been with me here from the very, very beginning, when we both had much darker hair. So my final words, stay engaged, stay informed, don't give up on this community, don't give up on what you believe, keep the faith, and thanks for all the conversations. I'm Charlie Sykes, and that's a wrap.